Hello, my friend. Welcome to your sleep story. My name is Stephen Dalton. I'm an Irish storyteller, and it's my great privilege to be the voice that you listen to as you go to sleep tonight. Tonight's story came into being as a result of a suggestion by one of you. And the suggestion of a greenhouse got me thinking of my grandfather. His name was Roy, and he loved gardening, just like my mother, who also listens to these stories. So, hi Mum. And when I started writing this story, I called the character Ray, but Roy was very present in my mind. He was a kind man, and meant a lot to me. So I really hope you like this one. Okay, let's do the relaxation session now, which will take a few minutes before tonight's sleep story. I'm going to count down from 10 to 1, and as I do, allow yourself to let go more and more. 10. Feel the support of the bed beneath you, or the floor, or whatever you lie upon tonight. And beneath all of that, feel the support of the earth, our home. Feel the constantness of it. Feel that you can let go a little more now as you become more and more aware of that deep support, that constant support. 9. You are safe. Allow my voice to be an anchor of safety tonight, to be a friend. Know that my voice will only ever take you to safe places. And with that knowledge, see if you can sink into this moment a little more now. Letting go a little more now. 8. Feel into your body. Where are you still holding? Maybe you feel pain. Maybe you feel tension. Perhaps in your feet, in your lower legs. Maybe in your belly, or in your chest, or in your hands, or arms, or maybe you're like me, and you hold the tension in your face. Wherever it is, just allow it to release now. 7. The day is done. Whatever has been, has been. Whatever will be, will be. Whatever thoughts you may be having, just recognize them as part of the condition of being human. They will always come and go. And as they arrive, they are not to be fought with or repelled. Welcome them. See them for what they are, and let them go, and watch them float away like leaves on a moonlit river, or clouds passing in a starlit sky. Six. This is your moment. This is your time. You have nowhere to go now. Nowhere to be. So allow that fact to bring you into this moment even more now. To let go even more now. Five. Perhaps begin to feel a little gratitude now. Gratitude for this moment. Gratitude for the simple things. The breath in your body. The shelter you have tonight. The people that mean something to you. The simple things. 4. Peace lives within you. It is always there, waiting to be found, waiting to be felt. It is your constant friend. See if you can feel that peace tonight. See if you can find it. 3. Begin to engage with your imagination now. Imagine a lovely garden with a big oak tree in the back. And not far away is an old, characterful greenhouse. It's raining. It's a cozy day. And inside this bountiful greenhouse is a man called Ray, delicately and mindfully tending to his vegetables. Allow yourself to immerse in this moment, to follow the story of Ray. 2. Checking in with your body one more time now. Your body has worked hard for you today. It's time to give it rest. And one. Completely letting go now as I tell you tonight's sleep story. The rain had been falling gently since before dawn, drumming softly against the greenhouse roof. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the faint sweetness of leaves, warmed by the steady hum of life. Ray moved slowly along the rows of plants, his hands resting lightly on the edges of the wooden frames that bordered the beds. He paused by the tomatoes, their green vines trailing upward, their fruit heavy with the promise of ripeness. A bead of water clung to the curve of one tomato, catching the dim grey light, filtering through the rain-streaked glass. Ray bent closer, studying it with quiet satisfaction. But he didn't pick it. Not yet. Outside, the rain fell steadily, blurring the edges of the world beyond the greenhouse walls. Ray liked it that way. In here, surrounded by the steady growth of his plants, the weight of time seemed to lift, as one man had once put it to him in his youth. In here, there was no fear of the clock. He reached out and brushed a fingertip over a leaf, feeling its cool surface, smooth but firm, alive under his touch. The sound of rain deepened slightly, a soft swell as the wind shifted outside. Ray moved further down the row, his steps unhurried. He knelt beside the cucumbers, their trailing vines stretching wide, their fruit tucked neatly among the leaves. A quiet smile crossed his face as he adjusted a wayward stem, the gesture careful and practiced. For a long while, he stayed like that, listening to the rain and breathing in the familiar, comforting smells of the greenhouse. Here, in this warm and sheltered place, it was easy to feel the world was at peace. Now Ray straightened slowly, his hand resting on one of the wooden posts that framed the greenhouse. The wood was smooth under his fingers, worn by years of use and care. This place had been a part of his life for as long as he could remember. His earliest memory of it was as a boy, no older than 6, watching his grandfather kneel by these very same beds, his hands calloused and steady as he worked the soil. You see, the greenhouse had been his grandfather's pride, built by hand during a lean year when the family had little but the will to endure. Ray's grandfather, Billy, used to say that growing food wasn't just about filling plates. It was about building a future. A greenhouse is a second house, he would say with a chuckle. Treat it like one, and it'll look after you. And it had. The food grown here had fed their family through tough times. There had been seasons when storms ruined the fields, but the greenhouse always stood firm, a shelter against the harshness of the outside world. Its walls had held warmth when winters were bitter, and its roof had shielded tender shoots from the heavy rains of spring. Ray took a step back, letting his eyes sweep over the space. To others, it might just look like a simple structure of wood and glass, but to him, it was alive. The beds were like rooms, each one familiar in its layout, each holding its own stories. Over there, in the corner by the rosemary bush, his grandmother used to sit on a low stool, shelling peas, while telling him stories about her childhood. He let his hand trail along the edge of the cucumber bed as he walked, his mind wandering to the meals this greenhouse had provided. Summer salads, eaten under a wide oak tree, warm stews in the winter, made richer by the vegetables grown here, jars of tomato sauce lined up on the pantry shelves like little treasures. The greenhouse hadn't just fed the body. it had sustained the spirit too. Ray stopped by the door and looked out through the rain-speckled glass. The garden outside was blurred by the downpour, but the greenhouse remained a world unto itself. He smiled faintly. If this was his second house, it was perhaps the one that felt most like home. Ray reached for the watering can that sat by the corner, its metal surface dulled with age and use. The handle was cool in his hand, and as he carried it to the rain barrel, he could feel the faint sway of water slushing inside. The rain had filled the barrel nearly to the brim, and he tipped the can carefully, watching as the water flowed out in a clear, steady stream. It was late spring, and the greenhouse was at its most vibrant. The early greens of lettuce and spinach had already been harvested, leaving space for the deeper, richer tones of mid-season growth. The tomatoes were in their prime, their vines heavy with fruit that ranged from pale green to a blush of orange and red. The cucumbers sprawled low, their leaves wide and vibrant, while the peppers stood upright, their glossy skins beginning to show hints of yellow and red. Ray moved to the row of peppers, pouring the water slowly at their base. He crouched low to get a better look, brushing his hand against the soil. It was damp, but not too wet, just right for their roots to drink without drowning. He adjusted the angle of one of the stems, propping it gently against a small wooden stake. Without it, the plant might tilt too far, the weight of its growing fruit pulling it down. Next, he turned his attention to the rosemary bush in the far corner. It was one of the oldest plants in the greenhouse, a remnant of his grandmother's time. Its scent was sharp and familiar, rising as he rubbed a sprig between his fingers. The silvery green leaves stood out against the darker shades of the other plants, a reminder of seasons long past and meals shared. He trimmed a few sprigs carefully, thinking they might go nicely in the soup he'd planned for supper. The lettuce beds were nearly empty now. Their time passed, but the spinach beside them still clung on, its leaves thick and waxy. Ray pulled a few stragglers, their stems crisp under his touch, and laid them gently in a woven basket. This was his ritual, taking only what was needed, leaving the rest to grow a little longer. He worked slowly, deliberately, moving from bed to bed, checking the soil, adjusting the angle of a vine, or pinching off a withered leaf. His hands, though marked with age, moved with the surety of decades of practice. Each action was small, almost unnoticeable, but together they were the lifeblood of the greenhouse. The light outside was soft and grey, the rain showing no sign of stopping. Ray glanced up at the glass roof. Droplets sliding down in erratic lines. The greenhouse felt warm, alive, almost humming with quiet energy. The plants, at this stage of the season, seemed to hold their breath, neither young nor ready to harvest, but full of potential, like a song waiting to be sung. As Ray set the basket down on a low bench, a sudden flutter outside the greenhouse caught his attention. Through the rain-streaked glass, he spotted a blackbird hopping along the garden path. Its feathers were slick with rain, but somehow it didn't seem to mind, pausing now and then to peck at the ground. He watched it for a moment, leaning lightly against the frame of the greenhouse door. The blackbird reminded him of the days when his children were small, and the garden outside was their playground. It wasn't unusual to see them crouched in the dirt, their hands grubby from digging for worms or making soups from leaves and petals. They'd often chase the birds too, laughing as the startled creatures took flight, their wings beating in hurried arcs toward the sky. One summer in particular stood out to him, when the oldest, Anna, had discovered a blackbird's nest tucked away in the hedge at the far end of the garden. She had been so careful, peering at the tiny blue eggs with wide-eyed wonder, shushing her brothers when they got too noisy nearby. "You'll scare them away," she'd whispered urgently, her fingers pressed to her lips. Ray could still hear the soft laughter that had filled those days. The garden alive with the boundless energy of childhood. He remembered how they'd carry baskets of vegetables into the kitchen, where Margaret would teach them how to snap beans or shell peas. The blackbird outside gave a sudden chirp, shaking the rain from its feathers, and Ray smiled faintly, lost in the memory of those simpler times. Now the garden was quieter. The children had grown, each carving out their own lives far from home. The house felt bigger these days, quieter, though the greenhouse still held echoes of those younger years. Ray found comfort in knowing what they had built here. Both the garden and the life they shared would always be rooted in his children, wherever they might be. The blackbird hopped closer to the greenhouse, tilting its head as though studying him. Ray chuckled softly and reached for a small handful of seeds from the bench, scattering them just beyond the door. The bird flitted forward cautiously, its glossy feathers catching the dim light. It was such a small thing, and yet, in this moment, it meant so much, bringing back these beautiful memories. Ray returned his attention to the greenhouse. He moved toward the stack of twine on the workbench, cutting a piece just long enough to secure a sagging tomato vine. The twine was coarse between his fingers, its texture familiar, almost comforting. He wrapped it carefully around the vine, tying it loosely to the wooden stake beside it. The stake had been in use for years, its once smooth surface now marked by grooves where ties had been secured and removed over countless seasons. Satisfied, he ran his hand over the length of the vine, brushing away a few yellowing leaves. These small tasks, tying, trimming, tending, were second nature to him now. They didn't require thought, only quiet attention, which was exactly why he loved them. Further down the row, the parsley had grown unruly, its feathery leaves sprawling beyond the edge of its bed. Ray knelt beside it, pinching off a few sprigs and setting them in the basket with the spinach. The deep green of the parsley contrasted sharply with the slightly lighter shades of the spinach, and he thought for a moment how vibrant they looked together. Beautiful, like something you'd see in a painting. He was now picking vegetables and other leaves and herbs for Margaret, who was in the kitchen. He could hear the faint clatter of pots and pans in the distance, and he knew that she would be wanting some greenhouse goodies. He moved toward the tomatoes. She'd asked for just a few, ripe but firm, enough for the sauce she was making. He bent down, examining the fruit closely, and plucked 3 of the deepest red ones from the vine, cradling them in his hand before placing them carefully into the basket. The skin was smooth and cool. The faint tang of tomato hanging in the air as he brushed the leaves aside. Next were the courgettes. Their flowers had just started to bloom But Margaret had told him the smaller ones were sweeter. She told him every year they were better for slicing into ribbons. He crouched low, searching among the broad, dark leaves, until he found two perfect ones. Their pale green skin, streaked with deeper hues. He snapped them off gently at the stem, wiping a bit of soil from one with his thumb, before laying them beside the tomatoes. Parsley, courgettes, tomatoes. He ran through the list in his head. Am I missing anything? If I have to come back out, I will, he thought. Ray carried the basket to the door, setting it on the low shelf beside the frame. He rested one hand lightly on the door handle, but didn't turn it just yet. Instead, he stood there, looking back at the greenhouse. The warm, earthy scent seemed richer now, as though the plants were breathing softly in the stillness. The rain outside tapped gently on the glass, its rhythm steady and reassuring. His gaze wandered over the rows of plants, each one thriving in its own quiet way. He thought of how the greenhouse had been a constant in his life, something that connected him to the past. He could see his grandfather again, kneeling in the soil with his sleeves rolled up, showing Ray how to plant his first seedling. He could hear his grandmother's laughter as she brushed dirt off her apron, holding up a basket of freshly picked herbs like a prize. The years layered themselves in his memory. The summer his mother had coaxed strawberries to grow in the far corner. The autumn when his father's hands had stained green from shelling beans. The winters when Margaret and the children had huddled inside the greenhouse to escape the chill. This place wasn't just a shelter for plants. It had sheltered lives too. Ray reached up and touched one of the wooden beams, his fingers tracing the grain of wood. How many hands had done this before him? His grandfather's, his father's, his own children's when they were young. Even after all these years, the greenhouse felt alive with the echoes of those who had tended it. The walls, the soil, the air. He stood there a moment longer, letting the memory of their voices fill the quiet space around him. It wasn't sadness that he felt, but a kind of fullness, like the greenhouse itself was holding him, just like it always had. Ray smiled. He'd come back tomorrow, and the day after that, and all the rest of his days, because this place wasn't just a part of his past. It was a part of him, and everything that had come before.